Hello, and welcome to Handled-ish, Productivity for the Imperfect, a weekly podcast for those who want to elevate their productivity, but they're not looking for perfection. I'm your host, Betsy Hayes, and I am so happy you're here, either at Podcast Land or on YouTube. This is episode 43, and I want to talk about the language surrounding lifequakes. So the term lifequake, which of course is derived from the idea of earthquakes, right, is something I heard about recently. Pretty sure it was Instagram, and it means something disruptive and or destructive that happens in our lives, right? And the idea of a lifequake really resonated with me because I think I love super strong analogies. I love when we can explain complex things in a way that helps us understand and process and deal with them. And I really think that thinking about destructive and disruptive things that happen to us as lifequakes is incredibly helpful, or could be, right? When something happens, and if we're calling it a lifequake, we're going to have to assess it on our lifequake scale, very similar to the Richter scale for earthquakes. So as a smaller earthquake, a 1 or a 2 or even a 3 tends to not be terribly disruptive or destructive yet. However, it is still an earthquake. And then when you get into the 5 or 6 range, that can be potentially disruptive and destructive, depending on where it is and if it's near a population center and all of that. And then, of course, we have the 8 plus, which tend to be disruptive and destructive, no matter where they are, whether they are, involved in land or cause a tsunami or all kinds of stuff. But once you get over to that part of the Richter scale, we're talking about major, major things. And if we look at this similar scale for our lifequakes, we have to do 2 things. So the first one is we have to assess the current lifequake in perspective with all the other lifequakes we've had, right? So if this particular situation we would label a 6 or a 7, what is this in relationship to that? And it truly helps us have perspective on whatever it is that's going on. So that's one reason why I think this could potentially be helpful. Attaching a number to it really gives it a little bit more depth and meaning, and it's less nebulous and perhaps less overwhelming, or makes it, if it's not less overwhelming, right, it helps assess the significance and therefore causing us to, spend the time and the resources to deal with whatever it is. So this assessment on the scale of the lifequake, I think, can be incredibly helpful because we need to put it in perspective of all the other lifequakes. The other thing that I love about this is while you're doing this, right, you're assessing this lifequake, the current lifequake, it will remind you that you have survived every other lifequake that has ever happened to you. And I'm going to say that again. You have survived every other lifequake that has ever happened to you. And you have. It is super important to remember this every time a lifequake comes along. I think that can help us, manifest resilience. It can help increase confidence, help us sort of get out of our own way as far as, potential problem solving. And I understand that there are lifequakes that will just knock you on your fanny, just like real earthquakes will, right? And it takes a while to get up and figure out what the heck to do next. And then there's other ones that are just, shake us up, but don't cause too much damage other than, perhaps maybe a little bit of disruption in our day. And looking at things that happen to us from this particular lens might help us deal with our lifequakes a little better and help us to be the productive, happy, lovely humans that, we're all striving to be. So I'd love to know what you think about this idea of lifequakes and plotting them on a lifequake scale, and whether or not you believe, like I do, that it potentially could help us put things in perspective and also remind us that all the other lifequakes have been on this scale, whether it's on one end or the other, and you're still here. So I think that's saying a lot, right? And shouldn't be discounted when we think about what's happening in our lives. So thank you so much for joining me today, and would love to connect at Betsy Hayes, BetsyHays on social media. My website is betsyahays.com. And yeah, share, rate, review. You know what to do with podcasts. Really appreciate your support. And until then, tune in next week, or excuse me, after then, tune in next week for the next episode of Handled-ish, Productivity for the Imperfect. Until then, please take care and be kind to yourself. You are doing way better than you think you are. Trust me.